Hey, what's up everyone, Johnny the Geek here, and today I'm going to build a budget AMD gaming rig. This is going to be a step-by-step guide that will be the first of many high-quality videos I can produce. So first and foremost, I'm going to go over the parts list. Here's a quick rundown of the motherboard specs, and it's running an A55 Hudson D2 chipset. A couple of key differences between the A55 and the A75 is that the A55 uses SATA 2 3GB connections and does not have USB 3.0 connectivity. It also uses an FM1 socket CPU compatible with Llano-based APUs. The expansion slot is a single 16-speed PCI Express slot, a single speed PCI Express slot, and a single PCI slot. Two DIMM slots for dual-channel DDR3 memory capable of running up to 1866 MHz and up to 16 gigs in capacity. For the input-output connectivity, starting from the left is a good old PS2 connection for legacy mouse and keyboard, followed by 4 USB 2.0 ports. Next is the DVI and VGA connection. Then there is a gigabit Ethernet and 2 more USB 2.0 ports under that. Finally, there is the integrated audio ports. At the heart of the system is the AMD A6 3650 quad-core APU running at 2.6 GHz with 4 MB of total cache. This APU only works on the FM1 socket motherboards. The boxed retail APU comes with a stock cooler, which will be upgraded to an aftermarket cooling system in the near future. The memory modules are made by Patriot and is the Sector 5 16 MHz model totaling in 8 GB. For the discrete graphics card, this is the AMD Radeon 6770 with 1 GB of GDDR5 frame buffer. This is a PCI Express 2.1 16-speed card with a 128-bit interface. It supports DirectX 11, OpenGL 4.1, and iFinity. The connection is handled by 2 DVI ports, 1 display port, and 1 HDMI port. For storage, there are 2 hard drives. The boot drive is a Seagate Momentus XT 750 hybrid drive, and for media storage, it is the Seagate Barracuda 7200.11 with 1.5 terabytes of space. Both are SATA 3 6 gigabit compatible drives. The optical drive is a Blu-ray reader and a DVD burner that also uses a SATA connection. This drive cannot burn Blu-rays, but it can read them. Powering this system is an Antec High Current Gamer Edition power supply. 400 watts is just enough for this system's low power requirements. It features a large 135mm fan and is 80+ bronze certified. It has Japanese-made capacitors for reliability and a 3-year warranty. The case is a NZXT Source 210 ATX mid-tower. It can fit a micro ATX and an ATX size motherboard. It comes with all the necessary hardware to mount your devices. The front panel has 2 USB 2.0 ports, headphone and microphone jacks, 3 5¼ drive bays, and a start and reset button. All around the edge is an air intake ports for good airflow into the system. There's a large cutout for the CPU backplate for a cooler that's up to 160mm in size. There is also plenty of cable management grommets, 7 expansion slots, and the power supply is bottom mounted with room for adding a 120mm fan. There is also 8 3.5-inch drive bays and has room for 2 120mm fans. It comes with a 1 rear mounted 120mm fan and 2 140mm or 120mm fans can be added to the top. So let's start with the build. Set the motherboard down on a soft surface like the box. Open the lever to the CPU socket. Align the arrow on the socket with the arrow on the CPU and lower the CPU gently into the socket. All of the pins should easily go into every hole on the socket without any force required. Again, there should be no force required when inserting the CPU into the socket. Lower the lever and your CPU is now installed. The stock CPU cooler has 2 locking tension hooks. Put one of the tension hooks over one of the CPU brackets, then pull the other tension hook over the other bracket. Now turn the lever over to tighten the tension hooks. Locate on the motherboard the CPU fan header pin. The connector has a guided plug in order to match the guided pins on the motherboard. Plug the connector in straight down. Before installing the RAM, open the tabs on the side of the memory sockets. Line up the memory modules with the slot, and line up the cut in the RAM with the divider in the memory slot. Press straight down into the slot, and if needed, grab the bottom of the motherboard for stability. Too much force at an angle can break or damage the slot. Prep the motherboard by installing the input-output shield. Press along the edges of the plate to snap in all sides. Be careful not to cut yourself because the edges of the plate is sharp metal. Because the case has a bottom-mounted power supply with a fan grill, the power supply will have the fan facing down to bring in air. This will only be cooling the power supply. The screws being used are 632 hexagon. These screws have a coarse thread. Now is a good time to start some cable management. Put away all the cables behind the case. As the build goes on, the cables will be used as needed. Route the main ATX power cable through the grommet for now. Now do the same for the motherboard's CPU power connector. Before installing the standoffs, take a look at where you need to place them for your motherboard. Different size motherboard will require standoffs in different locations. Some cases provide a guide for the various motherboard size. Next to each hole is a corresponding indicator of what size motherboard requires a standoffs in the hole. Another easy way to determine what holes to use is to line up your motherboard with the case and point out what holes need to be used. It is very important to use standoffs because without them your motherboard will not be grounded and will short. This will cause damage to your motherboard and not allow it to boot up. You can start off by hand tightening them and then use a supplied tool if your case came with it. Otherwise, a pair of pliers would be enough. Before inserting the motherboard, make sure that the input-output shield does not have any metal tabs in the way. Now bring in the motherboard at a little bit of an angle and line up the ports with the shield. Then line up the holes in the motherboard with the standoffs. Now notice the metallic contact points on the motherboard holes. It is important that you use the proper screws to screw in the motherboard. The screw top must be able to make contact with these points in order to properly ground the motherboard. These screws are 5mm 632 size. If you do not use the correct screws, your system may not even start. Wait until all the screws are in before tightening them down. Now connect the motherboard power connector. This connector supplies power to the CPU and only needs 4 out of the 8 pins. It should not matter which one you use, and it's shaped in a way to where you cannot plug it in wrong. Now for the 24-pin ATX power cable. Like the previous power cable, this has a clip and can only fit in one direction. There may be some force required, so grip the bottom of the motherboard for added leverage. Insert the cable until the clip snaps into the hook. Now this is one of the most difficult parts of the build, the front panel connectors. Some motherboards will have a guide on itself, but the best place to look for instructions on installing the connectors is the motherboard's manual. This board has a layout for power LED, hard drive LED, power switch, and reset switch. Take a close look at the connector and notice the arrow on one of the two connectors. This usually indicates the positive terminal. The motherboard's manual will indicate which of the pin is a positive pin, and you will need to align the positive connector with the corresponding positive pin. When ready to insert the connector, do it straight on and not at an angle. For the USB connection, the motherboard has 3 areas to plug in the connector. Choose any of the connector because they will all work. Now notice that the connector has one of the holes filled in. This is a guide for you to match with the pins on the motherboard. You will also notice that the USB pins on the motherboard is missing one of the pins on the bottom right corner. Line this missing pin with the filled hole on the connector plug and plug it straight on. The audio connector is much the same, but the filled hole is in a different spot. Again, plug the connector straight on. There may be a little bit of force required to plug in the connector. Be very careful not to bend the pins. Don't forget to practice some cable management to make your system look neat and organized. Installing the graphics card requires 2 of the expansion slots to be removed. Similar to the RAM modules, line up the cut in the card with the slot in the PCI Express slot. Press firmly until you hear or feel the card click into the slot. Hold the card into the slot until you get at least 1 screw into the case, then finish with the second screw. Now locate the power connector for the graphics card and plug it in. There is a clip and the hook is to ensure that there is only one way to plug in the cable. Now for the hard drive. Slide it in with the connectors facing out. Use the 5mm 632 size screws for both sides of the hard drive. It is important to use all 4 screws to reduce vibration noise caused by the hard drive. For smaller 2.5-inch hard drives, there is an adapter to mount a 2.5-inch drive into a 3.5-inch drive bay. Slide the drive into the adapter and screw in the drive. This system did not come with the adapter and it was purchased separately. Now slide the drive into the drive bay and use the screws provided by the adapter. Before installing the optical drive, remove the drive bay panel. Some panels can easily be removed by pushing it out, but some may have a latch or screws. Slide the drive into the case and screw in the drive using the fine threaded 5mm M3 size screws. These screws are the only screws to be used with the optical drives. Notice the shape of the SATA power connector. It will match the shape of the male end on all the drives. Plug in the power to all the drives. The same will go for the SATA data cables. Plug in all SATA data cables. Plug in any fans or power connectors on the case and after some cable management, close the back panel of the case. Now plug in the essential devices on the back of the computer. With a new build, only use the monitor, keyboard, mouse, and audio connectors. Do not connect other peripherals such as a printer or webcam yet. It is best to install the peripherals after installing and configuring the system completely. Before plugging in the power cord to the power supply, switch the power supply off. The circle is the off position. Plug in the power cord and then switch the power back on as indicated by the straight line. Give the system a startup test to make sure the fans are running and the drives spin up. Congratulations on building a computer. Be sure to watch the system configuration and installation of software video. Links to the parts and future videos are in the description. Don't forget to subscribe for more system build videos. As always, thanks for watching.